ahead and start our press conference. Thank you so much to everyone who is here to talk about SB 522, Donna's Law, especially Katrina Breeze, who flew in for this hearing and has been one of the main individuals spearheading the adoption of Donna's Law around the country. Today we want to talk to you about SB 522. We want to talk about tragic but preventable circumstances where individuals are dying by suicide and have not been given all the tools that they could be to prevent that outcome for themselves and for their families. Suicide is on the rise, but many are preventable. And it is rising faster here in Georgia than it is in other states in the Union. Over 48,000 people died by suicide in the U.S. in 2021, and nearly 1,700 of those were Georgians. In 2021, 226 of those deaths were among veterans, and 60% of Georgia suicides are by firearms. We don't hear about suicides by gun the way we hear about mass shootings, but we can't sweep the facts under the rug. Suicide is a leading cause of death above homicides. And people may think of them like they do sometimes erroneously think of gun violence as an urban problem. They may be thinking of suicide by gun also as an urban problem. In fact, in both instances, it's more prevalent in our rural communities. Thanks to the compassion, personal experience, and hard work of Katrina Breeze, Senator Harrell and I, are today presenting Donna's Law as one method to prevent suicide. I'm going to let Katrina tell her mother's story in more detail, but she suffered from bipolar disorder, and this tool was not in place in the state that she lived in before she spontaneously bought a gun and committed suicide. So how does Donna's Law work? It creates a way for people battling suicidal thoughts to voluntarily put themselves on a do not sell list for guns. People can voluntarily and confidentially suspend their own ability to purchase and possess firearms. They would decide this knowing that they're a person that maybe has battled depression in the past, has had suicidal ideation in the past. And in a moment when they're not in that low, they realize that when they're in that state, may be at risk of doing something spontaneous and taking their own life. And when they're in their right state of mind, they say, I want these tools available to protect myself if I'm not always as I am now, if I do have that low again where I'm experiencing suicidal ideation. Donna's Law is easily implemented and at a very low cost. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation will create two forms: a form to get on for a person to voluntarily place themselves on the do not sell list, and a form for the individual to get themselves off. A person can file the form with the probate court in the county where they reside, or complete the form with their health care provider. Upon receipt of the form via either method, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation contacts the FBI to put the individual's name on the NICS system, which is the National Instant Criminal Background Check System that gun merchants utilize for background checks. The goal of Donna's Law is prevention. It is a lifeline to those who are vulnerable to self-harm, and it gives those individuals the freedom to choose to help themselves so that they can live. Georgia would be the fourth state to adopt this legislation. The other states are Washington State, Utah, and Virginia. We have a number of expert speakers that I'm excited for you to hear from today. In addition to Ms. Breeze, we have practitioners in the medical field as well as one of our citizen advocates who's an expert in suicide prevention, who can tell you some other important relevant facts about what Donna's Law would do to help. But first, I'm going to turn it over to my co-sponsor on this legislation, Senator Sally Harrell.
Thank you, Senator Parent. I too want to thank everyone for coming today. I've actually been working on Donna's Law, the Donna's Law bill, for the last couple of years. I've been trying to get bipartisan support because it seems like if there's any piece of gun legislation we could introduce in Georgia that could get bipartisan support, it would be this one, and it should be this one. And we are still hopeful that we'll be able to get that support. When I realized that Senator Parent was also working on this bill, we decided to pair up. And pairing up resulted in us getting a hearing today in the Senate Public Safety Committee, which we're very excited about. Just recently, this bill took on new meaning for me. Shortly after Senator Parent and I filed Senate Bill 522, a young woman who is a family friend tragically died by suicide with a firearm. None of her family members knew that she had that gun. There are too many people hurting in our state. The COVID-19 pandemic expanded and intensified a growing mental health crisis in Georgia. Mental Health America ranks Georgia 49th in the country for access to mental health care. While we work on removing barriers to access, Donna's Law will help people who experience suicidal ideations to protect themselves from making an irreversible decision. Studies show that suicide attempts are hasty decisions made during a short-term crisis. Donna's Law can help those in crisis and their mental health providers to save lives. I now would like to introduce the woman who is why we are here today, Katrina Breeze, who was able to travel here today, and we're so grateful that you are here.
Much. Yeah, I really appreciate it. This is my mom, Donna. We call her Mama Donna in New Orleans. She recently died by shooting herself in the head with a handgun she had just purchased that same day. She did not want to die, and she did not want to shoot herself. She wanted to live, and she wanted to play with her grandchildren, but her bipolar disorder created an impulse for suicide. She was aware of this and frightened by her altered state. She knew that she was in danger, and she immediately took proactive steps to protect herself from suicide every way that she legally could. She went to her doctors and psychiatrists regularly and maintained daily contact with them. She then voluntarily committed herself to inpatient psychiatric care multiple times in a row. She tried everything she could to not kill herself. Despite the best psychiatric care, my mom was forced to leave her hospital programs, and she impulsively Googled for nearby gun stores on her phone. She drove to the gun store and bought her first gun and shot herself. Our family called the police 5 times that day to prevent the tragedy that was unfolding. My mom wrote to her psychiatrist that same day, desperately begging for help. My mom had never even held a gun before. She took the gun to the public park and she shot herself under a tree. I know my mom would have signed up for this list because she definitely did not want to die. Had my mom been involuntarily committed to the psychiatric hospital, she would have been protected from an impulsive suicidal gun purchase. But because she took the initiative to voluntarily commit herself to a psychiatric hospital, she was not protected from purchasing a gun. A voluntary waiting period to purchase a gun could have saved her life. I want to be on this list too, because families like mine desperately need this tool. Thank you.
Thank you, Katrina. Next up is Chelsea Pyatt.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for having me here today. My name is Chelsea Pyatt. I'm the Associate Area Director for the Georgia chapter of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and our chapter is in support of Katrina and Donna's Law. So I'm speaking about this issue today, not only as a representative of AFSP, but also as a suicide loss survivor. I lost my father to suicide by firearm in 1996, so I was very young at the time and didn't know what resources were available to me. My journey with AFSP has been instrumental in my grief, and just want to share a little bit about what AFSP does and how we can support. So we are the leading not-for-profit organization, and our mission is to save lives and bring hope to those affected by suicide. And we do that through research, education, support, and advocacy. And I know we touched on this earlier, but just close to 1,700 deaths in Georgia in 2021 were suicide deaths, and 60% of those were firearm deaths. So at AFSP, we strongly encourage gun safety and safe storage, safe usage. And research shows us that putting time and distance between a person who is at suicide risk and the lethal method can save their life. So that's what Donna's Law would help to do, is to put time and distance between someone who is in that suicidal crisis. So AFSP, again, is happy to be here and support Donna's Law and support Katrina as well. So thank you.
Next up is Dr. Peter Ash.
Thank you very much. I'm a professor of psychiatry at Emory University. I also sit on the legislative committee of the Georgia Psychiatric Physicians Association, which is basically the leading professional organization representing psychiatrists in Georgia. And I am happy to say that the GPPA does support this legislation. I'm authorized to tell you that. And really what this does from a psychiatric point of view is it allows patients who anticipate that they may act impulsively to put themselves on a list so they can't buy guns. I think from a mental health perspective, we understand that many mental health conditions, most in fact, wax and wane. And as mental health practitioners, we try to help patients have insight into their condition. One classic example, particularly for these kinds of issues, is bipolar illness, which different people have different courses. But the characteristic course is there's a period where the person is actually normal. They're not experiencing symptoms. And then, often biologically driven, their mood shifts, and they may get depressed for a while, and then after a while come out of it, back to normal. Then they may get a little hyper and manic and come back. And so these people can, while they're in their normal state, can clearly anticipate, because they've had a history, that in the future they're likely to get depressed for periods of time. And given that, we try and help support patient autonomy to really, when they're doing well, make decisions about what should happen to them when they're not doing so well. In a way, this is analogous to the Psychiatric Advance Directive, which was legislation that was passed in Georgia back in 2022, which allows patients, when they're doing well, to give consent for psychiatric treatment of whatever sort they want when they need it later and may not be in a position to understand the pros and cons of treatment. They can also appoint an agent, but for purposes here, so we have a history now of having mechanisms so that patients, when they're doing well, can make decisions that will affect what happens when they're not doing well. And Donna's Law, I think, is another instance of this, where they can protect themselves to that. Another thing about this law, particularly from the perspective of a psychiatrist, is it provides a clear way to take up with a patient considering when things aren't going so well. For example, a very large percentage of inpatient psychiatric admissions are precipitated by a person either making a suicide attempt or having serious suicidal thinking. So they come into the hospital in that state, and then they're treated, and by the time discharge comes around, they're improved. And at that point, you discuss with the patient, what's the safety plan going to be going forward? And this provides easy, clear way to bring up an issue about, well, what about, the idea that you might get impulsive, and when you get more depressed, you may feel like hurting yourself, and here's a way you could protect yourself from that. So that would be not only helpful to patients, but would be helpful to clinicians as well. And I think these kinds of things, like the psychiatric advance directives, on which we have a fair bit of research, they are generally accepted by patients because the patients feel that it increases their autonomy. It increases their ability to make decisions. Often people caught up, particularly in the mental health system, feel, well, other people make decisions, the doctor says this, the doctor says that. And ways that you can help the patient feel that they're in control of what happens to them are very valuable. So with that, I'm personally, and on behalf of the GPPA, happy to support this bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ash. Next up is Kim Jones with NAMI.
Thank you, Senator Harrell and Senator Parent, so much for this bill and for your support and work on this bill. Thank you, Ms. Breeze, for being here today, and my regards for your mother as well. You're a brave woman. Again, I'm Kim Jones, Executive Director of NAMI Georgia, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and I am here to offer support for this bill. We think it is a good bill that allows people and peers to have choice and control over the process, which is very important to those we serve. And that is exactly what House Bill 522 does. This bill will also, as was just mentioned, broaden the opportunities for clinicians and counselors for patients' needs and give them more opportunities to also help those that we serve. So we're just here today to say thank you to our senators for bringing this forward and participating in this process and helping us make a better Georgia for those we serve. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. And finally, we have Roland Boehm.
Good afternoon. My name is Roland Boehm. I'm one of the co-founders of the Georgia Mental Health Policy Partnership, along with Kim, and the former chairman of the Georgia chapter of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. I'm also the father of a 29-year-old young man named Kyle who took his life in August of 2019. I am delighted to be here to lend my support to SB 522. As you've heard, it does a number of things, but one of a couple of measures that maybe are worth noting is that this is not just a bill that's designed to help those who may be suicidal. This is a bill that sends a lifeline to their family, their friends, their colleagues, their classmates. This is a way in which an individual who might otherwise take their lives is able to move beyond that. As was mentioned, the best thing to put between yourself, if you're suicidal, and the act is time, and this gives that time. And while some may be concerned that somehow it implicates firearms and may in fact impede or encroach on Second Amendment rights, this is fully consistent with our Second Amendment rights. Our rights don't require us to have a gun. Our Second Amendment rights give us the option of having a gun, just as it gives us the option of saying, I will not have a gun, or I will not have a gun for a certain period of time. And so by being able to put that time between the individual and the act itself, lives are saved. Lives are saved not only for those individuals, but for every suicide death, 135 other people on average are affected. And those are immediate family members, friends, classmates, colleagues, things of that nature. And those who are affected by suicide are themselves at a higher risk of suicidality in the years to come. So this offers an off-ramp for an individual. It provides a blessing to that individual's family, friends, colleagues, and classmates. And it is something that is fully consistent with any conception of what our rights are under the Second Amendment. So I think that this is a perfect vehicle, as Senator Harrell was mentioning, to sort of move forward in terms of saving lives and bringing hope to Georgians who might otherwise consider taking their lives by firearms. So thank you both for bringing it, and thank you for your efforts. I'm so sorry for the loss of your mother.
You as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's all of our scheduled speakers, but we're happy to answer any questions if there are any.
I was just going to ask, we're getting toward the end of the session here. What do we feel? How confident are you feeling that this bill is going to get any kind of a vote?
Well, our goal is to, say thank you to Senator Albers, the chairman of Public Safety, for having a hearing, even though it was introduced late in the session. Do you want to speak about your work with him over the last few years? Yeah.
Sure. So our terms are 2 years. 2 years goes very quickly when you're only talking about 40 days in each of those years. So it is common to introduce issues one term and then carry them through the next term. And I think we have some long-term goals like that. It is actually quite an accomplishment to have gotten to hearing today because, like I said, I've been trying to get that for 2 years. It's difficult to get anything heard in this state that has anything to do with a firearm. And so I think we have taken tremendous steps forward in getting the discussion started.
You answered my question with that. I was just going to ask about conversations with colleagues across the aisle, but it sounds like you've spoken to Senator Albers about it.
Yeah, and I think there are going to be an opportunity for some good conversations with our colleagues on both sides of the aisle, obviously, especially the Republicans, over the interim and hopefully as we get into next year. And that was one of the goals of introducing the bill in a full hearing, even though we knew that it would not be eligible for a vote this year. And I think the opportunity that our colleagues had to hear from all of these individuals and experts can start to the education process. And when we get into next year and for meetings over the interim, there'll be more time to explain some of the nuances and educate folks on suicide and suicide prevention when they may not know, for example, that those that don't survive a first attempt often do not try to commit suicide again. So I think there's some opportunity for education after hearing from some of these experts today, and we'll hope that we can work to build towards a bipartisan vote in favor of Donna's Law next winter.
That's a very important point.
Yeah, come
which
to
is,
the,
a number of, sorry.
just in case.
Pushing it over.
Yeah.
It's a very important point. Some people think that once you become suicidal, you remain suicidal and you will continue to attempt until you ultimately complete that suicide. But the facts show that to be a bald-faced lie. What you see is individuals who have attempted suicide but have not completed. 90% of them will not go on to die by suicide. So that if you can save a life in the short term, you've saved that life in the long term. And what a minimal investment for such a tremendous return. So,
Thank you.
there we go.
Any other questions? Well, thank you all so much for being here, and we hope to see you again next year as we continue pushing this legislation forward and try to save Georgians' lives. Thank you.